All right, everyone, hi. Hi. Welcome. We are English 1013, and I am Dr. Masson. Welcome to Tyndale, if it's not your first class, which I trust it isn't at this point. It's your first class with me, and in my first class, I never take the whole time, you'll be pleased to know. In part because I lecture in literature, and most of you have not yet got the materials, and what I would like to do as a common practice is for you to have read the material in advance of the class. And since you don't have the book, or I can't be certain you have the book, I think I'll postpone it till such time as you do. This is the first text, the Odyssey of Homer. And it's translated with an introduction by Richmond Lattimore. I think it's a good translation. To predict a question that will come is, can you use other editions? The answer is yes, but it's problematic. If you want to look at it, it's divided into 24 books, and each of them has line numbers and so forth, and depending on the translations, the line number, the page number, everything's off, so it's just a little bit harder to follow, that's all. So if you can get this one, it's good, it's readable, I recommend it. It's pretty reasonably priced as well. So as far as that goes, and that would go for all of the course materials, which I'll get to in a second. If you use the editions that I have recommended, they tend to be on the cheaper end. I have not bought an anthology. I've got the individual works, but they're usually better versions than the anthologies. And the anthologies I'm just not happy with. I don't like the selection. I don't like the volume. I don't like the fact that they tend to edit it and cut things out. I'd rather have the full works. So that you can enjoy them now and afterwards when you may want to reread them, I hope. I did eventually myself. Yes, sir? Do you have a preference for, should we try and get the books in a physical copy? Yes. Okay. Yes, you should try to get them in a physical copy. For a number of reasons. I remember it was over a decade ago, somebody told me that ebooks were available and so forth, and you could get all the books on your, hard drive, whatever, or access them and so forth. Obviously, that's okay, but there are studies now that suggest that the same degree of deep reading doesn't take place online. I don't know what it is, but you will have noticed yourself when you're reading even articles online, which are pretty brief, you tend to click away from them pretty quickly. And maybe it's something about the screen and its stimulation. I just don't know. I just note the effect, even in myself, that I can concentrate better when I have a physical book. You can also flip back easier, and you can put a mark in it, and you can do all sorts of things with the physical copy. Really interesting technological note that just occurred to me. When the codex was invented in the Middle Ages, this was transformative for Western culture because all of the 66 books of the Bible that you have now could be put together in one book. And that allows you to cross-reference and to see how intertextual the whole Bible is. Constant references between books all over the place. If you have it together, then obviously you can read it that way. Before it was read in scrolls, and the sense of God's continual, persistent, and logical coherence of the various genres of Scripture wasn't apparent until you actually had it together in one book we call the Bible. It was various books. Now it's one book. It was one book before, but actually produced in one. That's a very different thing. It's quite transformative. I do think being physical beings that occupy space and time, it matters that we have physical things. Including people. Screens connect you to people on the other side of the world, but there's something missing. There's great power, but there's something missing. And you view yourself differently when you use it as well, including the fact that you have to see your stupid face when you're looking at other people, which you may not want to do. I don't like looking at my stupid face when I'm looking at somebody else. I'd rather look at their stupid face than my own, and vice versa. So there's a self-awareness that comes from the technology that's just problematic. But anyway, that's totally digression. Yes, get a physical book. So that's what you get for asking me a question. You get an essay in response. So this is Intro to Literature, as I said. I'm going to come at the whole course, so this is 1013. There is a follow-up course, 1023, that's next semester, but I see the two as a coherent whole. I am going to make an argument at the beginning that I'm going to carry through as a narrative thread throughout the entire 2 semesters that will show the development of the mind, of the literary mind, the cultural mind, the Western mind. These are all Western cultural texts, so I don't want to make claims about it being a global thing, but to show a pattern of development and transformation that takes place over time. And that word time is a funny old thing, which maybe you've never thought about. We have dates and times that we measure time by. This is the year 2024, and there's a punctuation in time when Christ came, which changed time. Literally, time became measured in accordance with the advent of Christ on earth. We call it AD, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. The secularists don't like the AD because it has religious connotations, so they get rid of the AD and they call it CE, Common Era. But it's the same date. So irrespective of whether you want to acknowledge it's the year of the Lord, or if you just want to say it's a common era, you're still acknowledging the actual year when the time is measured. Now I realize that is a little simplistic, but it's also significant. There is a significant change there. Begs the question of what we mean by the common era even. What is common about the common era? I find the designation wholly unhelpful myself, but then I'm a Christian, so I'm biased on this. But it's even still, what's the point if the start date is exactly the same? And something important does happen in that period, and it's in the period that this course this semester is covering. And that is, and let me put this up on the screen here, the period from the Greek period, which we will cover in September, to the Roman period, which we'll enter into in mid-October with Virgil and Ovid, into the period that, and this period, the Roman period, is exactly the period when Christ is born. So when the Aeneid is written, the author of the Aeneid, Virgil, is a contemporary of Caesar Augustus, and in fact the work was commissioned by Caesar Augustus as a memorial of the greatness of Rome. And he asked the great writer Virgil, acknowledged by those of his day as the greatest living poet, to write an epic which would give glory to Rome and the greatness of Rome. Now remember, this was written at the same time that God sent his son into a little backwater of the Roman Empire where nobody noticed what had happened there, in a place called Judea at the time, a little town called Bethlehem. At the same time that the greatness of Rome was being proclaimed in the Aeneid, God had sent his son to change human history in a way that was not acknowledged by the Roman Empire. And we know something of that story. I'll get into it more. But it's a significant time period, and it falls right within the context of this course. I'm going to end up teaching English literature, but English literature is transformed by Greco-Roman literature and by the advent of biblical literature into the Western consciousness. And I'm going to try and trace the development of the mind and the worldview that we live in to this day, which was changed by those events. And so it's sort of a big picture course. Whatever subject you're taking here as your major, you're going to find that I am touching on themes and ideas that are really big ones, and that's intentional on my part. And I'm going to use the epic to illustrate it. So this semester, I'm going to deal with 4 different epics. Homer's The Odyssey, first one. Could have chosen the Iliad. He wrote 2 epics, but we'll look at the Odyssey. The great account of the aftermath of the great event in Greek history, the Trojan War. The Trojan War is the subject of Homer's poem, the Iliad. Last 10 years. The Odyssey is the 10 years that come after the Trojan War, and the Wanderings, the Odyssey of one hero whose name is Odysseus as he wanders back home. And it becomes culturally transformative, those two texts. The Greeks read Homer as if he were their Bible. And the epic is the means by which the Greek culture derives its understanding of wisdom and virtue. It's exemplified in Homer. Homer becomes a sort of a Gandalf figure for his day. He teaches people. He leads them. He mentors them. In fact, you're going to find early on in the Odyssey there's actually a character called Mentor. Greek word about a Greek character. That's his name. An old man named Mentor. Word we still use to this day. It's not in Scripture, by the way. The word mentor is not there. We talk about mentoring all the time. It's a word derived from Homer. Some people ask, why do we read Homer when we're in a Christian college? What's with the paganism? It's because there's a cultural milieu in which the Bible develops that is important for understanding Scripture, and it goes vice versa. Paul has read the Greek classics and assumes that his audience has. And we need to read it to understand better. Even if we're just going to understand Scripture, understanding that context helps a bit. But we'll read the Odyssey, and the Odyssey is the great work, the great epic that tells us about three areas, three realms that are of interest for all cultures, namely heaven and the earth and what's under the earth, or hell. It's not called hell. It's called the underworld in Homer. It will be called the underworld in Virgil as well. But it's a place of where people go after death and where they're punished furthermore. So there's something hellish about it. And the punishments they suffer are pretty horrid. So there is something about it. So in other words, it acquaints us, the epic, with ultimate reality. It's talking about the deepest reality upon which everything else depends. It's engaging with those realms, mysterious things, places where the gods reside, places where the demons, not that they're called demons, but where supernatural beings or even the dead go down. It also talks a bit about human nature in the Odyssey. In the case of Odysseus, he is a demigod. He has a divine mother and an earthly father. Same with the great Achilles. They live in the Bronze Age, when heroes walked the earth, sometimes called the heroic age, when men walked the earth like gods and did godlike things. And they are the subject matter of epics. So we're talking about, I don't want to say supermen, because it gives sort of the wrong connotations of superheroes. Odysseus is not a superhero, but he's more than just a man. He's a great man. There's a greatness about him. And yet at the same time, he's exemplary for his readers. We're supposed to emulate his greatness. We're supposed to emulate the greatness of Achilles. We want to be like them. He's a role model. The Greeks are to follow in the footsteps of Odysseus and be like him. For Christians, we want to be like Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Yes. In the Odyssey, we have role models as well. Not theologically the same, but there's still a sense of modeling. This is how you are to behave. If you want to be a virtuous, wise human being, be like Odysseus. That's what Homer's Odyssey is going to teach us. And so it'll talk about all sorts of different aspects of life in this is why it's called epic. It's a grand picture that deals with grand things. I'll tell you the purpose of life. It'll talk about the meaning and significance of history from the Greeks' perspective. It'll talk about how to treat the opposite sex. It'll talk about how to treat the gods. It'll talk about how you treat strangers, how you treat guests, etc. All of these are normative. You're expected to act in the way that you've been taught there. So it's an instructive, it's not just for entertainment. When we read literature, we tend to think it's about having a good story. There's a lot more than a good story that is intended by the epic. It's the way the Greeks enculturated their people. The word culture here, by the way, in Greek is paideia. I don't know if you've heard of this word. Let me write it down and try not to rip my mic down. Write it up here. But it's P-A-I-D-E-I-A. Paideia. Within that word is the word pais, from which we get pediatric and pediatrician. Iatros in Greek is a doctor. And a pediatrician is a child doctor. And paideia is everything that you give to a child to learn, from which we derive the word encyclopedia as well. Everything around a child that a child needs to learn is in the encyclopedia. An epic is an encyclopedic work, intentionally so. So it's a didactic, it's for teaching. The word paideia is used in Ephesians 6 verse 4, by the way. When it says, fathers, raise your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord, that's the way it's usually translated. The word is paideia, the word fear. It's not even translated as well at all. That's not. But paideia is the word there. Paideia and nouthesia. So it's a whole-scale cultural instruction in how to think and how to act. That's what the epic does. So I'm going to trace it from its beginnings in Homer, and this will be normative. Everyone who writes an epic will look back to Homer. The genre that he creates, the epic, has certain features that I will, delineate for you, and we will follow those features as they develop, and we'll see that they change as the worldview of the writers changes, as they move from Homer's polytheism, where he's got many, many gods, the Olympian gods, and Virgil will hold to the same polytheistic worldview, to a Christian monotheistic worldview, where the gods have a different character. There's not just different gods, but different character. Human beings in the Christian understanding bear the image of God. Every human being, male, female, slave, free, young, old, all bear the image of God. Not in the Greeks' conception, not in the Romans' conception. In the Greek and Roman conception, those that bear the image of God are the rulers. They will be adult males. That's it. In the Greek polis, the city-state, it will be propertied individuals. And again, they will be males that will have a right to participate in political life, etc. They will, in some sense, bear the image of God. That word image of God, by the way, in the ancient Near Eastern world is what kings call themselves. They say, I bear the image of God. I'm Pharaoh. I bear the image of God. I'm God walking on earth. Worship me. It's not just obey me. There's a sense of worship that is due. That is there throughout the ancient Near world. The rulers are those that bear the image of God, and the rest of us do not bear the image of God. Christianity asserts no. Every person single person bears the image of God. I'll talk more about that when I come to Ovid's Metamorphoses and compare and contrast that with the scriptural account in Genesis. I'll say more about that at the time. But Virgil, I skipped over a bit here. But we'll look at the epic 4 times. I said the Odyssey, the Aeneid, the Metamorphoses, very briefly, and then actually I'm going to do 5. I lied. And then Dante, who writes a Christian epic as a Catholic. And then finally, I will deal with the Anglo-Saxon epic, Beowulf. All of them have big pictures that talk about big things and normative ethics that go with it, etc. And I'm going to try and trace that over the course of this semester and take it into next semester as well, where we'll begin with John Milton's Paradise Lost. And then we'll get the Puritan account, more of a biblical account of what constitutes epic subject matter. And we'll find that each epic writer has read his predecessors and follows the conventions of the epic and yet disagrees fundamentally on certain issues, like the nature of the gods, like what it means to be a human being, like what the meaning of history is, like what the purpose of human life is, what constitutes human dignity, if there is any human dignity, how we regard people who are different than us. That's going to be transformed in the Christian era. And then as we go into next semester, we're going to find, come the Enlightenment, that whole epic tradition gets eviscerated. And the sense of the dignity and worth of an individual human being gets lost. And we start getting nation states arising, and the significance of whole groups of people, nations. The modern nation state comes into existence in the 19th century, right? You may not have known that, but it does, with its hegemonic social institutions and so forth, with its state education and huge tax systems and so forth, and identifying in terms of nations in that sense is very different than what happened before that. And it, to some degree, creates a new model of hero, and I'm giving away all my cards on the table right away. The model of heroism come the 19th century is the orphan. Almost every popular work of fiction after the 19th century has the hero being an orphan. It's not accidental. I'll say more about that when the time comes, because I want to talk at length about the significance of it. I'll just say that it is. In Dickens' novels, they're all orphans. The comic superhero novels, they're all orphans. Harry Potter's an orphan. James Bond is an orphan. Little Orphan Annie is obviously an orphan, huh? Anne of Green Gables is an orphan. I mean, you name it. That almost every hero of fiction will be an orphan. How come orphans? Why? The sort of almost one-toned emphasis on this as your role model, because do you not have parents? Most of you are not orphans. So why would you want to model yourself after an orphan? What would be the consequence of following an orphan's way of life as your ideal way of life? It would cut you off from your parents and the connection with your own natural family. It would cut you off from your own history and culture, and it would cut you off from any sense of natural connection to anything. That would be the effect of it. Is that the purpose of it? Well, we'll have to talk about that when the time comes. I just note it at this stage, because we're not there yet, but that's our culture. We look at things as orphans. We think no one can tell me what to do. I'm in charge of my own life. Now it's got to the point where we even talk about self-identify. Like, I determine who I am. Like, that's sort of a consequence of an idea of orphanage. It's not a necessary consequence, but it is a consequence of it. Which is effectively is I create my own nature. Just a divine attribute, by the way. Only God determines his own name. He says that I am that I am. When Moses asks him, who shall I say sent me? He says, tell him that I am sent you, which sounds like a riddle, and it probably is a riddle. But it's him defining himself and what being is, etc. Yes? I do not do it. I will. I'll have a sense of who's here over the course of time. So from the beginning, I want to treat you like adults. I require attendance, but I don't want to record it, and I don't want that sort of supervision. I want to treat you like adults from the beginning, because my belief, and maybe I'm idealistic, is that if I treat you like you want to be here, you will want to be here more. I think it's a bit naive on my part, but I'm okay with being naive on this. I wouldn't say that, but I'm not going to be sitting mandating with a checklist or so forth, or even do it that way. I just don't, it drives me crazy. I don't like the monitor surveillance society. I think needs to be pushed back against. Yes?
I have a question though.
Yes, sir.
Do we need the full Divine Comedy, or do we just need the Inferno?
Yes, the Inferno is the one you're going to need. The rest, I'm going to skip over or give you a sort of whistle-stop tour of it, so yes.
And do you prefer a translation for that?
Did I not specify? I mean, I know I did, but I think I got the one from, oh, stop it. Everything, you can't just click on anything anymore. You gotta, I'm surprised they don't want to know. H-T-X. Probably going to want my firstborn's name. There you go. And again, it's Alan Mandelbaum. That's one I think it's good. You can find it online as well. But again, what I said about text. Oh, And by doing that, I clicked away from the class webpage. Oh, there we go. Didn't lose it. That's one I prefer. So the hyperlinks will link you to the Amazon sites, etc. Yes?
So just for asking questions, I know we're not reading the Iliad, but would it be beneficial if we did?
The whole thing? Yes, of course. It would also be beneficial if you read things that are outside the context of the course. Honestly, the Iliad is the great epic in some ways. The Odyssey is rich and alliterative and allusive, and other epics and other works that we're going to read on the course will refer back to it more than the Iliad. The Iliad's about the war. And a lot of it, a significant portion, is the battles, like arrows going through people's eyes and spears plunging through their chests. And this, it's not for everybody. Maybe it should be, but it isn't. We'll get some of that in the Odyssey as well. There are battle scenes, but it's not dominated by that. The Odyssey is beneficial in different ways, but I think the Iliad's definitely worth reading. And the story of the Iliad is presumed in the Odyssey, and it refers back to it regularly in the Odyssey. It'll talk about what happened in the Odyssey. Interestingly, it won't talk about Achilles too much. It talks about what happens when the heroes came home. Assuming the fall of... by the way, I don't want to spoil it, but in the Iliad, we don't actually get Achilles' death by the arrow through his Achilles' heel. That's not in the Iliad. Not everything that you know about the Greek heroes is going to be in these epics. It'll surprise you. Why did they choose what they choose and why they leave out certain things? Because I would have thought the Achilles' heel is a pretty famous thing, and you might want to have included that in the epic in which Achilles is the main hero, because he is. How come that isn't in there? Well, it's a very good question. But I'm not going to teach the Iliad. I would love to. But I have a course to get through, and I want to get to the present, and so I'm just going to take one epic, and I'm going to do the whole epic. So please get this book and read it as quickly as you can. Read it out loud, I would recommend. You will find that it's easier for you to follow if you hear it audibly. And if you're reading it, I believe in multi-sensory information. If you're reading it, articulating it, hearing it, it sinks in a different way. Books are meant to be read aloud. We've got into the practice of silent reading, but it really is not a great way to read. Reading out loud, including scripture. Read it out loud.
Isn't there a verse in the Bible that talks about reading out loud?
I can't recall it, but I'm sure there is. It makes sense. You can hear it. You can speak it. You can understand it. And there's again, we have bodies. We have mouths. We have ears. We have minds. All those things, if they're brought into play in a multiple fashion, I think it has a different experience. And you read it in community often as well, and that's another feature. The idea of being able to read quietly by yourself in a room is something that only a few monks would have done historically, had the ability to do. And we lose something by it. Yes?
Isn't the Odyssey also it's an epic, isn't it? Also
Yes.
a poem, so if you read it silently, you won't catch a lot of things.
It is a poem.
Yeah, it's meant to be read out loud because people back then...
Not only is it meant to be read out loud, it was sung out loud in a community. So we're going to find within the Odyssey there are characters who are singers with a lyre, and they sing the account of the Iliad and sing the account of the Odyssey and the heroes, and there would be a community gathering around the song, and the song functions something like the reading of scripture, and it's pleasing. People sit in, but they're not just listening and being entertained, they're being informed. It's deeply transformative communal reading in a way that I say the only corollary that I can think of, although I'm sure there are others, is in scripture. You read and gather around the community. There's music accompaniment, etc. The musical accompaniment adds beauty to the mix, and beauty is not dissociated from truth or goodness. Yes?
When you say the Odyssey focus more on the poor, that's not like 4 different books, right? That's like...
It's divided into 24 books. So this is the Odyssey, and the chapters are called books. And there's a structure to it. I'll talk about the structure next time. But it has a very books 1 to 4 deal with the life of not even Odysseus, his son Telemachus. It's often called by experts the Telemachy because it deals with him. And how does it deal with him? As a man who thinks he's an orphan, who has a famous father who he's never seen. And he's a prince in a kingdom where he has grown up without the ability to act as the king. So he's underage. He doesn't know how to act like a man. He's never had anyone model for him how to act like a man. And he now is a man. People look at him and say, you look like Odysseus. He said, I've heard people say that. And you know what? He's upset and angry about it. Why would he be upset and angry? I mean, he's a famously good-looking, powerful man. Why am I not happy about that? Because I've never met him, and you've seen him, and you have a stronger connection to him than I do. All I am is his son. Or so my mother tells me. Right? He wasn't around. He has no idea. So he experiences life effectively, his first 20 years as an orphan. He is not a happy boy. He doesn't know how to act. And there are things to be done. So he needs to be prepared to act like a man. And Mentor will come in. It's actually Athena, the goddess of wisdom, who disguises herself like an old man and starts to teach him what he should do. This is really interesting in that sense. So first 4 books deal with that, and then we'll move on. But there's a structure to it. I'll lay it out for you on the whiteboard next time. This is just an overview. I like what you're doing, which is interrupting me with questions, by the way. I welcome it all the time. No, it's good. I am a lecturer. I will talk till the cows come home, but I like the interaction. So if you have a question, don't think it's a stupid question. It may be a stupid question. There is such thing as a stupid question, actually. But I'm not going to tell you it's a stupid question. But mostly, even if it's a stupid question, there's something behind the question. It's just a poorly articulated question. Sometimes. Often. No, I mean, there really are stupid questions, but normally not. They're usually pretty good. And just not formulated as well as you can. That comes with time as well. First year literature, first year university is a blur. It's a total blur. First week, it's really tough. But we'll get there. So I'll go from the Odyssey, as I say. So the epic tends to dominate the whole course. And for the reasons I've said already. But in between there, I'll deal with a few other genres. And one of them is the famous work by Sophocles, Oedipus the King. It's a tragedy. The tragedy, as a genre of literature, it was acknowledged by Aristotle to be the greatest literary genre, which sounds very odd to my ears, because everyone, including Aristotle, would have read Homer and regarded Homer as the greatest. His pupil, by the way, Aristotle's pupil was Alexander the Great, and he slept with the Iliad under his pillow. Who did he want to be like? This is Achilles, the great Achilles, whose rage is provoked because the great king Agamemnon will not acknowledge that he is the greatest. Agamemnon takes away his girl. Says, the prize that you won in war, she's mine. I'm the commander, and you do it, or I'm gonna kill you. And he says, you can take my prize, but I won't fight for you anymore. And try beating the Greeks without Achilles. He's so angry. That's the first word in the Iliad, by the way. Wrath, the rage, the wrath of Achilles. That's how the whole thing begins. And you follow the great Achilles, who is the greatest, by the way. And he shows it in the end. But still, I'm going to make you want to read the Iliad rather than the Odyssey. It's an extraordinary book. I do have lectures online. I did a podcast with a former colleague on Paideia today. We talked about the Iliad a little bit. But the Oedipus the King was recognized by, as I say, Aristotle as a example of the tragedy, the greatest literary work, and he said that this one is the best model of the tragedy, the one we're going to read. That very work, read by Sigmund Freud, the psychologist, from which he got the term the Oedipus complex. man marries his mother, murders his father. He says that it expresses desires deeply hidden within the human psyche and so forth. And I say, you're a sick, weird man. But he got it from this story. That's not what Oedipus means. That's not what Sophocles means to teach us by the Oedipal complex. But he has read it. And again, the works that we read here have been read by people who've been educated before us. They're no longer read. And so this is one thing I'll say about Tyndale. You're going to be acquainted with works that are no longer read in universities, even though they would have been read by anybody and everybody 30, 40 years ago. They would have been. And if you hadn't read them, you could not be considered to be educated. Couldn't. You wouldn't be. You'd be regarded as ignorant. Yes?
Why did they stop teaching this stuff in universities?
They wanted to put other things in its place. And maybe they're hostile to it, but maybe it's just you only have so much time in a class over the course of 4 years. And if you want to deal with some things, then you have to leave other things out. Even with me on this course, I've left out a lot of things that I would like to have taught on. I just can't do everything. I think that I'm dealing with the most important things, but at the end of the day, I think that's the main reason, because why would they oppose teaching? I mean, even if you're anti-Christian, why wouldn't you want to teach Homer and Virgil and Sophocles and so forth? Well, you would. But if your intention is to deal with the modern world and with a different way of looking at things, the modern scientific worldview, then you're going to want to get to the business right away. I think that's largely it. It's sort of contempt for the past. And again, if you think like you're a unicorn or an orphan, then you don't really think you have anything to learn from the past. And it's part of the progressive mindset. The best things that have ever been taught or thought are happening right now. Why do I need to read Homer? It's not just why do I not need to read the Bible. Why do I need to read Shakespeare? Shakespeare was a white European male. Haven't we had enough of those? We'll stop reading him. In California, they banned him for that reason. He's a white European male, and he's dead. Why should we read him today? Terrible argument, by the way, but that's the argument. You don't read somebody because they're dead? Bad. Because they're a different skin color? Worse. Because they're a different sex than you? Like what? But that's effectively the reason. You think, but everyone has read Shakespeare for centuries and regarded as a part of a good, sound education, and you're going to throw it out because of such silly things as identity group characteristics? It says more about the people that are making the decisions than anything else. Yes?
I just have a question about, you were talking about the themes before, about the orphan, and that's happening now. Do you think that another, like you were just talking about Shakespeare and you were talking about, what was there? And both, when I think about Shakespeare, I think about Macbeth. And both
Sure.
those stories start with the prophecies and then how they eventually get fulfilled, despite all the struggling against it. And then when you think about stories now, it's the exact opposite, where it starts about an expectation or a prophecy and how they beat fate or they beat this or how they beat their own sort of thing. So is that like another...
That's another feature of contemporary literature, yeah. Fates are by definition inescapable, because the fates are three goddesses that measure out your life. One pulls the strand, one measures it, and the third cuts it. And the cutting of the cord is the end of your life. There's the beginning, there's the length, there's the cut. Three of them, fated. Even the gods can't change the fates. Even the gods, the Olympian gods, can't change what's fated. It's inescapable. So the Oedipus, it's prophesied that he's going to marry his mother and kill his father. What do the people do to avoid that? Everything they can. His parents give him away and say, go expose him to the elephants, kill him, because we can't allow that to happen. The herdsman takes pity on him. He gives him brought up in another country. He hears the story that he is illegitimate, whatever, and that he's going to, and he tries to avoid his fate. And he goes back to the city where he came from, and and on the way back home, runs into guess who? His father. His father insults him. He hits him, falls out of his chariot dead, kills his father, and then goes onto the city where his father had come from, Thebes, and finds that there is a mourning going on because the queen's lost the king. And he says, "You look strangely familiar." Yeah, there's how it happened, and it's fated. And so the irony is they try to avoid the fate and they fulfill the fate, right? So it says something about the Greeks' view of free will and fatalism and so forth. Is very different than Christian views, by the way, but interesting there. So as I say, we're going to get into all that. But you're right, today it's fated or it's prophesied this, but then it doesn't happen. I think, well, then it's not a prophecy, you fool. Like, if it's not fulfilled, it's not a prophecy. Like, prophecies have to be fulfilled or they're not prophetic. Like, you stone the false prophet because it doesn't happen, right? That's, yeah.
Are all of our essays going to be like digital, like on computer?
I've been wrestling with that over and over. Because I've been thinking, I see laptops, I'm going to ban them. For your own benefit, for reasons that I should say. I didn't even get to this. Because I see it as small, but it's not small, I guess, in terms of practice. You learn more from writing less, and you write more when you type, because you type faster than you write. But you retain more when you write than when you type. And it's partly because you have to process, and it might be a struggle at first. If I want to say there's an upside to it, I'm recording every lecture, and it will be on my YouTube channel, and you can go over it again, and you can do whatever. You can go slow or fast or do something funny to the digital output. I have no idea. Give me a Mickey Mouse voice. I don't know if you can do that yet. But so if you feel like you're missing something, you won't miss anything. But taking notes is part of the didactic process of learning. Not everything I say is worth writing down. So careful note-taking is a developing skill. It makes you think and then write and listen carefully for, oh, that's a key point. I got to write that down. I mean, I'll even tell you sometimes, write that down. But I won't always do that. And I think you'll find it helpful to your understanding development. I still go back to my essay, my notes from undergrad. And at first they weren't very good. And they get better. It just takes time. But again, you've got the lectures that you can go back to and watch again if you want. So if you miss a class, it's there. Or if you're doing revision at the end of the semester for exam, you may want to go back. You're not going to have a lot of time, but you may want to go back to that lecture and just speed it up and listen to it again, whatever. So I haven't wholly decided. I've even thought about the crazy idea of in-class writing essays. I know, heads exploding all over the room. We'll talk more about that. I'll tell you next class. But Oedipus the King is a tragedy. First time we'll do a tragedy, and it is a type of play. So it's a performance. The Greeks performed with masks on, by the way. Couldn't see their faces. That has an effect. I'll talk about why they do that, but you can sort of hear it. Can you hear better? Yeah. A mask amplifies the voice because it's a wooden mask and it amplifies, and they're in an amphitheater outdoors and it projects the voice. That's one of the reasons, I suspect. But in others, you can't even see the faces anyway. A third is they're not worried about the faces, actually. It's more the words rather than the image. And we think of theater, we're thinking about a visual spectacle. For the Greeks, it's more about what you hear. So that changes the context, and it's very much more in a Christian, pushes it more in a Christian direction, because Jesus is the Word of God. We have no idea what Jesus looked like, by the way, no idea. And you can speculate based on where he lived, etc. But we don't know. There's no visual description whatsoever, other than that people despised him. Just the look of him. But that's it. Nothing. You can't get any portraits. I mean, people draw or paint portraits of Jesus, but sometimes he looks Italian, sometimes he looks Dutch. I can assure you he's not Italian or Dutch. That's not what he's going to look like. Those are the painters. But I guess if you have no idea what he looked like, then he can look like the people you're painting for, because guess what? You bear the image of God. So in a sense, okay, sure. And I don't care. I'm glad I don't know. I can relate to the person whose face I have not seen because he comes to me in the person of the Word, and I hear and I relate to that person in a way that I don't to people whose face I can see. And Paul says that blessed are those who have not seen but hear. So there's something that's deep about hearing that is goes deeper than the superficial visual. Anyway, so then I'll go to the Republic, and I'm going to, even though Plato's a philosopher, the Republic in Book 7, he talks about the allegory of the cave. And that I'm going to talk about as a paradigmatic for thinking about literature. I'll say more about that at the time, and I have not asked you to buy that text. You can find the link there online. And we'll talk about that there. Then there'll be a actually, I'm not even sure because these dates are off and wrong here, but there'll be a reading week at some point in that. And then we'll move on to Virgil's Aeneid, excerpts from it in the end, because I don't want to take 4 classes to do it. We'll just do 3. And so we'll get into the Roman epic before moving on to the second Roman epic, which I'll even deal with in an even more cursory fashion, because I'm only going to read the account of creation according to the Romans. Remember, this is the context, is Christ is on earth at this time. And here's the Roman conception of how the world came about. Ovid will get it from Hesiod and various Greek writers. Very interesting. So we'll compare and contrast. We'll put Genesis alongside of the pagan so-called creation accounts, although they're not creation accounts because there's no creator. But how everything came about, where did it come from? And I'll talk about the consequences of the differences between the two views as well, and I think you'll find them helpful and instructive. Then we'll jump on a great length of history all the way to Dante, who's writing in 1300. An epic of 3 days that goes from Good Friday to Easter Sunday. On the first day, Good Friday, he goes down into the inferno, the underworld, down to hell. On the second day, he ascends Mount Purgatory, in Catholic belief, where you spend a period of time before you go to heaven. And on the third day, Easter Sunday, that's where he'll be. And so he'll give an account of human life over a 3-day journey. And he will be a pilgrim now, representing every person, every Christian. He says, in the middle of all our life's journey. That's how his epic begins. In the middle of all our life's journey. So it's about him, but it's about us. So again, unlike Homer's hero Odysseus, which is about a guy, and Virgil's Aeneid about Aeneas, about a guy, here we have it is about a guy, but the guy's journey is our life's journey. So it's an intensification. It applies to us even more than ever before. And of course, the journey that Dante undertakes as a pilgrim was the journey that Christ undertook. He died, and then he ascended from the dead. Didn't go through purgatory. But he did die, and he rose on the third day. Then I will go a little bit anachronistically back to the Anglo-Saxon epic Beowulf, which comes at the epic from a different area of Northern Europe. It's an Anglo-Saxon epic. It's very much in the same sort of spirit as the Norse epics, which you might know a little bit just from movies these days, Thor and so forth. It's more coming from a different vantage point, the Germanic angle on the epic. It's important for the development of English. Tolkien is heavily indebted to the account in Beowulf, but he's the translator of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which we'll read after that. Sir Gawain being one of the knights of the Round Table around King Arthur. And this is an episode of one of those knights' lives. Really fun medieval account. I think you'll enjoy it. And he meets a monster called the Green Knight. Then we'll move to a second work of drama, Everyman. It's an anonymous work, and the name of the work is Everyman. And it's about a man who is going to die, and the man who's going to die represents every man, every person. So you can see the literature now starts to become not about individuals in history, but about individuals that represent everyone. So there's a commonality of humanity that's represented in the heroes. That's the effect of Christianity. It's not the Greeks, the Romans, the Hittites, the Persians, whatever. It's us, people. And so it starts to transform. And the notion of the gods is that all of this is transforming over the course of the semester. We will conclude with shorter works at the end of the semester, purposefully done on my part. These are lyric poems, a different genre than I will have done up to this point, partly because by this point in the semester, everybody's running on fumes and doesn't want to read a large, long book, and you've got essays, and you're... So a little short poems in the middle of the, or in the early 17th century, after the Reformation, I think you will find them delightful. Profound as well. Right in the middle of the Renaissance, but also the Reformation. It becomes crystallized, and these are some of the best poems you'll find in all of Christian literature. And then 3 means of assessment. Dates are wrong here, but there's 2 essays and a final exam. Final exam, you'll find out more at the time. Comments or questions? You've already asked me a fair bit, but you can ask more. Yes?
With the essays, were you able to pick our own topics?
You can. I would pass them by me if you're going to do that. I tend to, because I use the essays to guide you down certain paths that equip you to write the exam as well. But you can, absolutely. But I will give a list of potential topics as well, because if you're up to producing essay topics, that's good on you, but I was not. When I was in your position, I was please give me something, and then I'll engage with it. By the time you get to 4th year, I think you have a little bit of better sense of your feet and more confident, and people will want to do that. I find in 1st year people aren't quite as confident, but if you are, then that's great. But do pass it by me. Yes? Oh gosh, I don't even, I'll get into all that when the time comes. But yeah, if it's going to be typed out, then, that sort of stuff, yeah. But I guess if I'm going to write it, then it'll be so I don't care. I don't care because I don't want you to worry about essay format in 1st year. I want you to engage with the text and engage with the class material and to focus on that. I find that, so this is English. English tends to use MLA, Modern Language Association formatting. In biblical studies, they use a different. In psychology, a third. Everyone has a different formatting, and you have to go through the stupid style guides, and you think, why am I wasting my time learning a style for a subject that I'm not even going to major in? I think that's a good question, good point, and you will not have to do that. You will have to use a style and be consistent with it, but I'm not going to say you have to write it in MLA, because I think it's just a waste of your time. And it creates fretting and anxiety about where dots and tittles are, and I don't care. Yes, this is an institution of higher learning. That stuff is bureaucratic. It's not insignificant, but it's not the purpose of the class. It's to be transformed intellectually. Transformed. Worrying about that stuff does not transform. Yes?
So based on kind of what you said, is there marked deductions for exceeding word limits and stuff?
No, you're gonna ballpark it. So it's what I don't even know what I have it say. It's 1,000 words, there or thereabouts. If it's too short, I'm gonna say, come on, you give me a little bit more than that. You gave me a page, it's supposed to be 2 or whatever. Then don't do that. But I'm not gonna be counting words. Life's too short. Not that, I'm not that sort of guy. It's can't, yeah. Yes?
Your office hours, do you just walk in or do we have to book it?
It's better if you book it, and I have office hours, and I'll list them, but I'm here, teach Monday, Wednesday, so you can come after the class, before the class, those are ideal, but I will come in on other days as well, happily do so, and in which case you want to email me, but if not, office hours, yeah, you can just come in, but somebody else might be in there. It's better if you email me, for sure, and I would welcome you to come. I'd like to come meet you in person. That would be good. Yeah. I did it. When I was undergrad, I went pretty regularly. I would say 1 in about 30 would come regularly to the prof's door. There's no compulsion, but it's an opportunity. And you can pass it up, and you may be happy doing that, and I'm good with that as well, but it's there. Yes? Sorry? Hard copy. Yeah, definitely hard copy is better. It's not the other one isn't good. But you might not have been there when I mentioned at the beginning. There are pretty conclusive studies now suggesting that the visual medium, maybe it's because it tires the eyes looking at a screen. I don't know what the reason for it, but that people do not read as deeply or as is needed. And those habits are affecting your ability to concentrate and to think. So do get physical books if you can. It's not like it's printed. What's the difference? There is a difference. Yeah, much better if you have your own. But they exist on e-copies, but I just don't find them as helpful. Even typing and essays, which I've done since undergrad. At first, believe it or not, I had a typewriter. And then during my undergrad, they switched over to Word. Yeah, date myself. That's how old I am. In the middle of my undergrad, they started doing it. And so it's like, this saves me time, because you used to actually write it out, and then if you could type, then great. Otherwise, you have to hand it to a typewriting service to type it out, if they demanded a typewritten essay, which they did, because I can't read your chicken scratch. Yeah. There were other hands? Questions? Yes?
This is just in regards to the text. And just your own opinion, if you want to share or not. Do you think society's view on human nature would change if we consistently read these books in university, or do you think it would stay the same from a Christian perspective?
So the Christian view of human nature is very different than the pagan view of human nature, as I said. But the pagan view of human nature still has what we would call objective morality. They think that there's an absolute right and absolute wrong. There are things that you don't do, or the gods will be outraged. And those are pretty consistent with a Christian worldview. So, like certain things you just don't do. So I do think there's some effect there. On the other hand, in the Greeks and the Romans, they have slaves, and they're okay with that. There's no concern about it per se, although when we come to Homer, there's a little episode where he talks about a slave and actually praises the slave. And you'll find that interesting. I'll talk about that when we come to it. But it has no sense of the value of an individual human life. Just doesn't. But neither do we. We don't value that. We value big things like nations. We don't value small things like the unborn. We don't value those things. We value the reigns of nations and their greatness on the playing fields, but we don't value the eternal value of a human soul made in the image of God. We don't value that. And the pagans don't either, but Christians do. So Christians transform the pagan world, and then we walked away from the transformation, but we walked away both from the transformation as well as what came before. We can't just go back to the Greeks and recover a sense of the dignity of a human being or what justice is. Women have no value in the ancient world. really. In Scripture, the first eyewitness and most significant people in some ways are the women. They're not the apostles, but they are significant figures. And in that age, that would just jump off the page. Right? Those are significant moments. And even from Genesis, Adam and Eve bear the image of God. That's pretty high. So you go from no status at all to be bearing the image of God. That's pretty transformative. You don't get that in the Greeks or the Romans. So I do think there would be enormous benefit, but not enough. It's not enough. So the Renaissance doesn't get there. That's why the Reformation needed to happen. And did happen. And transformed all sorts of things. But we'll talk about that when we come to that period. Any other questions? Yes?
What do you think about reading and like listening like through audiobook at the same time?
Do you find it helpful? Then I think it's good. The reason why it's helpful to read it and listen to somebody else is they have a nice voice and they can act it well. And maybe they pronounce words that you've never heard before, and oh, that's how you pronounce it. But they tend to be people who are voice actors, who have good voices, and they read well. And
do you have the same benefit to reading it out loud yourself?
I don't know, but I wouldn't think so. I think you get some because you hear how it's meant to be read, but in the end, your own voice, you are articulating it, and that's something you're doing actively. You know, reading is a very active activity, but it's a little different than speaking it. But those are really, I think those are complicated questions. And I don't have a definitive answer on it, but I do say you want to hear it and you want to speak it as well. You have a voice. And there's no voice quite like your own voice. Unborn babies know their mother's voice. It's really interesting. And jump at it, get excited. Yes?
For the assigned readings, do you recommend like taking notes on that, or will we go over?
Yeah, you can do that. So while you're reading it, you want to take notes? For sure. And actually, I encourage that. And even if you don't understand something, write it down, take a piece of paper and say, I'm going to ask that in the class. That's a great practice, yeah. So I'm going to put up a note. In fact, I don't know if I did it on the website, but I think I did. Let me see here. No, I didn't. I didn't put it up yet. It talks about reading habits and things that you might want to do to read along the way. I'll stick those up. And you can have a look at them and decide whether you want to follow them or not. But it sometimes helps people when they're reading to take notes, even in the margins or whatever, or in a piece of paper. Yeah, I think that's really helpful myself. Like even when somebody's preaching, I like to write because it helps me follow. I'm paying attention. Like, and then what I write, well, what I write down, I don't even need to look at that again. The purpose was to help me listen. Anything else? Time's a funny thing. In your life, the important moment in your life was when you were born, obviously. And there'll be an important day, which has yet to come, when you die. And then there's a really important day when you figure out what the meaning of your life was going to be, and you may come upon that at university. Like suddenly things started to be meaningful and important, and you really want to do it. That's how I came to undergrad, is suddenly I know what I want to do. I want to do this more. And then after that, I didn't know, but I really want to dig down on this and do it well. And I didn't do it well the first year, by the way. It was a disaster. But I wanted to do well, and I kept at it, and it worked out all right in the end. But I failed my first essay in English. And I really struggled first year. But I knew it was important, and I wanted to do it, and I persisted. So anyway, welcome to Tyndale. Do read the Odyssey. And as I say, it's the first 4 books, but if you can get ahead, it's good because it's 24 books. And I think you'll find once you're reading it, you may want to keep going. But you'll be able to tell me more next class. We'll see you on Wednesday, same time, okay? Take care. Not at all.